Guy probably lives off cat food to save enough for his little charity fund. The young man sneered, his voice low but sharp near the diner counter. As if he isn't broke already, the young woman beside him snickered back. Probably sleeps in that junker car he drives. The coffee cup froze inches from the listener's lips. His hand tightened, knuckles white. A chill that had nothing to do with the diner's air conditioning snaked up his spine. Who were they talking about with such casual cruelty? And why did their words feel like shards of ice piercing through him? He built an empire on comfort food and community, but stepping into his own diner, disguised Richard Harrison felt only the chill of disconnect. Why had his creation lost its warmth? Richard Harrison adjusted the worn baseball cap, pulling the brim low over eyes that usually scanned profit reports and expansion blueprints, not greasy diner menus. He pushed open the familiar glass door of Harrison's diner, the flagship location, the one he'd poured his soul into 15 years ago. The bell above chimed its cheerful, slightly off-key welcome, a sound that once signaled homecoming. Today, it felt like the opening note of an unsettling symphony. No one looked up. Not the waitress wiping down a nearby table with mechanical indifference, nor the two cashiers huddled at the far end of the counter, engrossed in a hushed conversation, punctuated by dismissive glances towards the kitchen. Perfect the disguise. Faded jeans, an old flannel shirt that smelled faintly of motor oil, 3 days' worth of stubble roughening his jaw, was working. He wasn't Richard Harrison, CEO of Harrison Hospitality Group anymore. He was just another face easily ignored. And that was precisely the point. Something was wrong here. Not just the slight, persistent dip in profits that the regional manager blamed on local market fluctuations, or the unusually high employee turnover rate brushed off as industry standard. It was something deeper, a feeling of decay beneath the polished surface. Customer reviews remained bafflingly stellar, praising the food, the nostalgia. Yet the warmth he'd strived to bake into the very walls of this place felt absent. He hadn't visited personally in nearly a year. Too caught up in board meetings, investor calls, the relentless pursuit of more. Had he lost touch with the heart of his own creation? The thought gnawed at him, a persistent unease that spreadsheets couldn't quantify or erase. He remembered the early days working alongside his first hires, the shared dream of creating more than just a place to eat, but a place to belong. Had that dream faded like the paint on the diner's sign? "Table for one," the waitress asked, her voice flat, her gaze fixed somewhere over his left shoulder. "Counter's fine," Richard replied deliberately, adding a rough edge to his voice, a gravelly tone that didn't match his usual modulated cadence. He slid onto a worn vinyl stool at the end of the counter, giving him a clear view of the entire operation. The lunch rush was nearing its peak. Orders flew back and forth from the kitchen, passed through a chaotic ballet of sizzling sounds and clanging pans. Waitresses navigated the narrow aisles with practiced speed, balancing plates laden with burgers and fries. The cash register chimed rhythmically. On the surface, everything looked normal, efficient even, yet the air felt tense. Strained employees moved like cogs in a machine, functional, but devoid of the easy camaraderie he remembered. That's when he first saw him, tucked away in the steamy alcove of the dish station. An elderly man moved with a careful deliberation that was almost jarring amidst the surrounding frenzy. While others rushed and clattered, this man handled each dirty plate with a quiet respect, his gnarled, veiny hands working with surprising precision. He was rail-thin, his shoulders slightly stooped beneath a faded, damp grey uniform shirt. A shock of white hair peeked out from under a stained paper cap. He looked easily into his mid-70s, maybe older, yet his eyes, when they briefly flickered up, were startlingly alert, observant beneath thick, bushy eyebrows. "What can I get you?" Richard turned. A young woman stood at the register, tapping impatiently on the screen. Her name tag read, Chloe. She had finally acknowledged his presence, though her expression suggested it was an inconvenience. "Turkey Club and a coffee," Richard said, sliding a 20 across the worn Formica countertop. As Chloe punched in the order with rapid, sharp movements, Richard nodded subtly towards the dish station. "He been here long?" Chloe followed his gaze and rolled her eyes dramatically, a sigh escaping her lips. "Arthur feels like forever," she stage-whispered, leaning slightly closer, as if sharing a tiresome secret. "Honestly should have retired years ago, if you ask me. Slows everything down." She turned back to the register, her dismissal absolute. Richard took his coffee, the cheap ceramic mug warm in his hands. Over the next hour he watched Arthur. Chloe wasn't wrong about his pace. He was slower than the younger staff darting around him. But slow wasn't the right word. Methodical, careful. He never stopped moving, stacking plates, loading the industrial washer, scrubbing pots with focused intensity. When a busboy carelessly dumped a heavy tray into the sink, splashing dirty water all over Arthur's already soaked apron, the old man barely flinched, just wiped his face with the back of his hand, and continued working. No complaint. No sharp word. Richard noticed other things, too. How a couple of older customers greeted Arthur by name as they passed the dish window on their way out. How Arthur's tired face would momentarily light up with a genuine quiet smile, offering a kind word in return. There was a dignity about him, an air of quiet perseverance that seemed utterly out of place amidst the casual indifference of some of the other staff. Richard felt a pang of something uncomfortable. Respect mingled with a growing sense of shame. Had he, Richard Harrison, created a system where a man like this was merely an object of eye rolls and whispered complaints? He nursed his coffee, the initial unease solidifying into a colder certainty. He needed to see more. He tried to catch Arthur's eye, maybe offer a simple nod of acknowledgement. Man to man, just as their gazes briefly met across the bustling diner. A flicker of surprise in Arthur's tired eyes, perhaps recognizing a shared weariness. Richard fumbled, knocking his paper napkin to the floor. Before he could react, Arthur, who had been passing behind the counter to retrieve a bus tub, bent down slowly, his movement clearly stiff, and picked up the napkin. He placed it back on the counter beside Richard with a quiet grunt that might have been thanks or simply effort, his eyes holding Richard's for a split second longer this time. It wasn't much, just a shared, fleeting moment of human connection in the impersonal rush, but it resonated with Richard more than any quarterly report had in months. Just before the lunch rush finally subsided, Richard witnessed something that made his stomach clench. A young woman. Grace, with two small, restless children fidgeting beside her, approached Chloe at the register. She looked tired, her clothes neat but worn. As she opened her wallet, her face fell. Richard saw her lips move, whispering something to Chloe, her cheeks flushing pink. Chloe frowned instantly, her expression hardening. She glanced back towards the other cashier, Ethan, a young man with a perpetually bored expression who had been leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. "Ethan, come here." Chloe called, her voice laced with annoyance. They spoke in low, irritated tones, casting pointed looks at the young mother who shrank under their scrutiny. Grace's embarrassment was palpable. Her children sensed her distress and grew quiet, clinging to her legs. From the dish station, Arthur looked over. He had been meticulously wiping down the stainless steel surfaces. Without a word, without hesitation, he dried his hands on his apron and shuffled towards the register. His walk was slow, slightly pained. Richard noted he couldn't hear the exact words exchanged, but he saw Arthur reach into his own worn trouser pocket and discreetly slip a few folded bills to Chloe. He then turned to Grace, offering a gentle smile and a quiet word that seemed to instantly ease her tension. The mother's relief was a visible wave washing over her face. She quickly gathered her children, murmuring profuse thanks to Arthur as she hurried out the door. The moment she was gone, Ethan muttered loud enough for Richard and several nearby customers to hear. "That's the third time this week, old man. You keep this up, you'll go broke, saving every stray that walks in." He smirked at Chloe. Chloe snickered a sharp, unpleasant sound, as if he isn't broke already. Probably lives off cat food, sleeping in that junker car he drives. Richard's hands tightened around his coffee mug, the ceramic warm against his suddenly cold skin. He felt a surge of protective fury, an urge to stand up, to shout, to defend the quiet, dignified man who had just shown more compassion than these two had displayed all day. He forced himself to remain still, to keep the rough mask of his disguise in place. The manager on duty, Eleanor, a harried-looking woman in her late 40s, whom Richard vaguely recalled hiring 2, maybe 3 years ago, walked briskly past the registers, her eyes scanning a clipboard, completely oblivious to the exchange that had just unfolded. Richard stayed put, ordering another coffee he didn't need. He watched as the afternoon wore on, observing the quiet rhythm of the diner shift. He saw Arthur stay well past the official end of his lunch shift, meticulously cleaning the floors around the dish station areas others had clearly neglected. He saw him patiently help a flustered teenage waitress restack cups she'd almost dropped. And then he saw Arthur discreetly cover the bill for an elderly man who seemed confused and distressed when his card was declined. Another quiet act of kindness performed without fanfare, noticed only by the grateful recipient and the increasingly watchful eyes of the diner's owner. Richard leaned back on the stool, the cheap coffee bitter in his mouth. The dipping profits and staff turnover weren't just numbers on a page, they were symptoms. Symptoms of a culture where cruelty could masquerade as efficiency, where kindness was mocked, and where a man like Arthur, a man embodying the very values Richard claimed to champion, could be dismissed as a poor worker, a burden. He had come here looking for business insights, but he was uncovering something far more disturbing, something rotten at the core. And as he watched Arthur wince slightly, while scrubbing a stubborn pot, Richard Harrison made a silent promise. He would understand. He would uncover the full truth, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. The chill he'd felt upon entering wasn't just the air conditioning. It was the slow, creeping realization that he might be responsible for the decay himself. He thought he understood the problem, but overhearing a whispered plot fueled by greed and malice revealed a darkness Richard Harrison hadn't fathomed within his own walls. The following day, Richard Harrison returned to the diner during the mid-afternoon lull. The frantic energy of the lunch rush had subsided, replaced by a quieter rhythm. The clinking of cutlery, the low murmur of conversation from the few occupied booths, the hiss of the coffee machine. He wore the same disguise, the baseball cap pulled low, the rough flannel shirt, a shield against recognition. His mission felt heavier today, tinged with the anger and shame that had simmered overnight after witnessing Arthur's quiet generosity and the casual cruelty of Chloe and Ethan. He spotted Arthur immediately, already working at the dish station. The old man seemed to move even slower today, a stiffness in his shoulders, a slight wince as he lifted a heavy stack of plates. Richard noticed him discreetly rubbing his wrist when he thought no one was looking. a small, involuntary gesture that spoke volumes about the physical toll of the job. Yet his movements remained precise, methodical. Chloe and Ethan were also on shift, their heads bent together at the end of the counter, whenever business slowed, their body language radiating a conspiratorial smugness that set Richard's teeth on edge. He chose a booth near the back this time, partially obscured by a decorative partition, ordering only coffee and a slice of apple pie he barely touched. He unfolded a discarded newspaper, using it as cover, while he focused his attention, straining to listen. He watched Arthur patiently show a new young busboy how to properly load the racks to avoid breakage, his voice soft and encouraging, a stark contrast to Chloe's sharp tone when she snapped at the same boy moments later for being too slow clearing a table. Richard's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about Arthur. It was about the entire atmosphere they fostered. He was so engrossed in observing the dynamics near the kitchen that he didn't immediately notice Eleanor, the manager, approaching his booth until she was right beside him, holding a coffee pot. "Need a refill there?" she asked, her tone professional but weary. Richard nodded, keeping his head down. As she poured, she paused, her brow furrowing slightly. "Sorry to bother you, but have we met before? Your voice sounds awfully familiar." Richard's heart gave a jolt. He felt a flush rise up his neck. He hadn't spoken much, but maybe his attempt at a rougher voice hadn't been consistent enough. He forced a gruff chuckle, looking up just enough to meet her eyes briefly before looking away. "How't, Mum? Got one of them voices, I guess. Folks say that sometimes." He took a quick sip of coffee, hoping the action looked natural. Casual. Eleanor studied him for another second, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, before shaking her head slightly. "Must be mistaken. Sorry. Enjoy your pie." She moved away back towards her small office near the kitchen entrance. Richard let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was too close. He'd have to be more careful, less absorbed. The risk of being recognized was real, and it would derail everything. The brief encounter sharpened his focus, reminding him of the stakes. As the afternoon wore on, the diner emptied further, leaving only a couple of regulars nursing drinks and a businessman typing on a laptop. Chloe and Ethan, sensing the lull, resumed their hushed conversation near Chloe's register. Richard slid out of his booth and moved back to a stool at the counter, closer this time, pretending to be engrossed in his newspaper again. Their voices, though low, carried in the relative quiet. 7 years, can you believe it? Ethan was saying, leaning casually against the counter, a smirk playing on his lips. 7 years washing dishes in this dump, pathetic. Chloe snorted, wiping down the counter with unnecessary vigor. What's pathetic is him playing St. Arthur, covering for every deadbeat who can't pay their bill. Like that Grace woman yesterday. Using his social security pennies, probably. Guy probably lives off cat food to save enough for his little charity fund. Ethan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Did you see that rust bucket he drives? Bet my last $1. He sleeps in the back seat. Nah, my money's on a cardboard box behind the Walmart, Chloe countered, lowering her voice slightly, though Richard could still hear every venomous word. Either way, he's becoming a problem. Eleanor's starting to ask questions about the register being short again. Richard's knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. He fought to keep his expression neutral, the newspaper a flimsy shield against the fury building inside him. He'd built this business, envisioning a community, a place of warmth and respect. Hearing this casual, calculated cruelty from his own employees felt like a physical blow. Exactly, Ethan said, his voice dropping even lower, leaning closer to Chloe. He glanced around quickly, ensuring no one else was within earshot. So here's what I'm thinking. We know the old fool slips cash in when people come up short. But Eleanor doesn't know that. All she sees is the till not adding up. Chloe's eyes lit up with malicious understanding. So, if we just help those numbers not add up, a little more. Precisely. Ethan nodded, his smirk widening. And that leaky valve on the coffee machine. The one near his station. Perfect. We'll make sure it acts up again tomorrow morning. Easy enough to loosen a fitting, just slightly. Say he must have bumped. It wasn't paying attention. Cleaning up adds to the whole can't trust the senile old man's picture. Chloe giggled softly. Oh, that's good. So it's not just the cash, it's incompetence, too. Right, Ethan confirmed. Then make sure Eleanor catches him near the register at the wrong time, maybe when he's picking up dropped change or something innocent. She connects the dots, short drawer, faulty equipment near his station, him hovering around the cash. She'll have to believe he's the one stealing and causing trouble. And then he's gone. Chloe finished, barely containing her excitement. Finally. And my cousin gets a job, Ethan added. Easy referral bonus for me, half for you for helping make the opening. Plus Chloe sighed dramatically. I am so sick of watching him shuffle around like some charity case. It's depressing, and the way some customers fawn all over him. Oh, Arthur, you're so kind. Oh, Arthur, you're a saint. Makes me want to puke. Tomorrow then, Ethan decided, his voice firm. Eleanor's doing inventory checks tomorrow. She'll be extra focused on numbers and things being in order. Perfect time for the till to be significantly short and for the coffee machine to malfunction right when Arthur's nearby. They sealed their vile plan with a quick, subtle fist bump, just as a family walked in, breaking the spell. Richard sat frozen, the coffee cold and bitter in his mouth. The fury was still there, but now it was mixed with a chilling disbelief. This wasn't just opportunistic theft or mean-spirited gossip. This was a deliberate, calculated, multi-pronged attack designed to destroy an old man's reputation and livelihood for a referral bonus and sheer spite. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. He watched Arthur emerge from the kitchen a few minutes later to help a teenager whose payment card was declined. Just like yesterday, Arthur quietly spoke to Chloe, reached into his pocket, and covered the difference. Richard saw Ethan watch the exchange, catch Chloe's eye, and make a small mocking gesture behind Arthur's back. "Why do you let that kid slide?" Ethan asked Arthur loudly, as the teenager left his tone, feigning casual curiosity, but dripping with condescension. Arthur shrugged, his voice soft but firm. Carrying the weight of experience, his mother lost her job last month. Boy's too proud to take charity, but I know he's hungry. Sometimes a hot meal makes all the difference in the world. He turned back towards the kitchen, oblivious to the sneer Ethan directed at Chloe. As closing time neared, Richard paid his bill, leaving a generous tip he knew Chloe didn't deserve. He walked out, but didn't go far. He slid into the driver's seat of his unremarkable rental sedan, parked across the street, the engine silent, and waited. Nearly an hour after his shift should have technically ended, Arthur finally emerged from the diner's back door. He moved slowly, rubbing his lower back, before shuffling towards the ancient dented Buick parked in the employee lot. The car coughed and sputtered to life. Like an old man clearing his throat, Richard started his own engine quietly and followed at a discreet distance. Arthur drove slowly, carefully through the main streets, past the neat rows of suburban houses, heading towards the commercial outskirts where the diner was located. But instead of continuing towards any residential area, he turned abruptly onto a poorly maintained dirt access road running behind the strip malls and warehouses. Richard hesitated for a moment, then killed his headlights and followed his car, bumping over the ruts. The Buick pulled to a stop behind a dense cluster of overgrown trees and bushes, effectively hidden from the main road, and even the diner's back parking lot. And there, nestled in the shadows, almost swallowed by the unkempt vegetation, sat a small, dilapidated trailer. It listed slightly to one side, its paint peeling windows, grimy. It looked like it had been forgotten there decades ago. Richard watched in stunned silence as Arthur slowly, painfully climbed the 3 rickety wooden steps that looked ready to collapse under his meager weight. The trailer door seemed stuck. Arthur had to put his shoulder into it to push it open. A single dim yellow light bulb flickered on inside, briefly illuminating a space so small, so cramped, Richard could barely fathom it being a home. Sitting alone in the darkness of his comfortable car, a wave of profound shame washed over Richard Harrison. Shame for his ignorance, shame for his detachment, shame for the system he had built, an empire fueled by comfort food and empty platitudes about family, that allowed a dedicated, compassionate employee, a man like Arthur, to live like this, hidden away in squalor, while others plotted to take away the little he had left. The whispers he'd overheard weren't just whispers anymore. They were echoes of his own failure, and the cold resolve that settled in his gut was absolute. Tomorrow the reckoning would begin. Shame burned hotter than anger as Richard learned the true depth of Arthur's silent struggle. Could he right the wrongs his own success had inadvertently caused? Richard Harrison sat in the sterile silence of his rental car, the image of the dilapidated trailer seared into his mind. The single flickering bulb illuminating that cramped, desperate space felt like a spotlight thrown onto his own profound failings. He, who worried about market share and quarterly growth, who lived in a home where walk-in closets were larger than Arthur's entire dwelling, had allowed this. In his company, under his name. The shame was a physical ache, sharp and suffocating, eclipsing even the cold fury he felt towards Chloe and Ethan. Their cruelty was a symptom. His negligence felt like the disease. How had he become so disconnected, so insulated by success, that he hadn't ensured a basic level of dignity for the people who kept his business running? He finally started the engine, the quiet hum, a stark contrast to the sputtering protest of Arthur's ancient Buick. He drove away, not with the satisfaction of having uncovered a plot, but with the heavy burden of knowing he was complicit through his ignorance. Exposing Chloe and Ethan wasn't enough. He needed to understand how things had gotten this bad, why a man like Arthur was living on the brink. Sleep offered little respite that night. Images swam behind his closed eyelids. Arthur's tired, kind eyes. Evelyn, the wife, Walter mentioned her face unseen, but her presence felt in the weight of Arthur's enduring grief and debt. The cruel smirks of Chloe and Ethan, the peeling paint of the trailer. By dawn, Richard had made several discreet calls from a burner phone, one to authorize the immediate covert installation of high-definition audio/video surveillance in the diner, overriding any previous budget concerns, and another to a trusted contact in HR, requesting Arthur's complete confidential employment file. Later that morning, clad again in his disguise, Richard walked back into Harrison's diner. The breakfast rush was winding down. He scanned the room, looking for the regular customer from yesterday, the one who had spoken of Arthur with such quiet respect. He spotted him. Walter, the name tag read on the man's familiar denim jacket, nursing a coffee at his usual corner booth. Richard slid into the opposite bench, offering a tentative nod. "Morning again," he said, keeping his voice low and slightly rough. "Mind if I sit here for a bit?" Walter looked up, his eyes crinkling in recognition. Not at all, places quietening down. He took a slow sip of his coffee. Richard hesitated, searching for the right opening. That dishwasher. Arthur, he began trying to sound like a curious fellow patron. Saw him helping out a lady yesterday. Real kind gesture. Seems like a good guy, but, well, he looks like he's carrying the weight of the world, you know. Walter sighed, swirling the coffee in his cup. His gaze drifted towards the kitchen doors. Arthur, he murmured, his voice softening with affection and sadness. Yeah, he's good people. Salt of the earth. Been coming here longer than he has. Almost started right after he lost his wife. Evelyn. Lost her, Richard prompted gently. Cancer, Walter said, his voice dropping. 5, maybe 6 years back now. They were sweethearts since high school, married over 50 years. Evelyn was his whole world. He paused, shaking his head slowly. The cancer. It took everything. Everything, Richard echoed, leaning forward slightly. Everything. And then some, Walter confirmed, his gaze distant. They had savings, a nice little house over on Maple Street, paid off and everything. But Evelyn's cancer was aggressive, needed these new experimental treatments. Insurance wouldn't touch 'em, you know how it is. Richard nodded grimly. Arthur didn't blink. Sold the house, cashed in his retirement plans, even sold the car they'd had for 20 years. Moved her into the best facility he could find. Got her every treatment, every specialist. Did it help Richard? Asked, his throat tight. Gave them 8 more months together. Walter said, his voice thick with emotion. Arthur says those were the most precious months of his life, even though they must have been the hardest. Holding her hand, talking about the old days. He trailed off, clearing his throat. After she passed, the bills just kept coming. Mountains of them. Friends told him, declare bankruptcy. Art, nobody would blame you. But he wouldn't hear of it. Said a debt was a debt and he'd pay back every cent owed in Evelyn's name. Said it was about honor. Richard felt a fresh wave of shame. Honor, while Chloe and Ethan plotted theft and deceit. So he needed work. Walter continued, oblivious to Richard's internal turmoil. And well, who's hiring a 70-something guy with bad arthritis and no real experience outside of the factory he worked at for 40 years before it closed down? This diner, Harrison's, it was the only place that gave him a shot. Dishwashing, he chuckled without humor. Works harder than men half his age, I tell ya. Never complains. And the trailer? Richard asked quietly, the image vivid in his mind. Walter sighed again, heavily, best he could afford, while still making those payments to the hospital collections. Bless his stubborn heart. Sends a check every single month, and he sends something to his daughter, Emily, out in Seattle too. Doesn't tell her how bad things are, though. Sends her pictures taken inside the diner, tells her business is good. Lets her think he's got a little management role here. Pride, you know. Doesn't want her worrying. Doesn't want to be a burden. Each word Walter spoke landed like a hammer blow on Richard's conscience. His company's wages, his benefit structure. Had he ever really considered if they were enough for someone facing catastrophic medical debt? He'd built an empire, but he'd failed to build a safety net for the very people holding it up. And the worst part is, Walter leaned in slightly, his voice dropping further. That patch of land where the trailer sits. It's being sold. Big developer bought it. Residents got a notice last week. 60 days to clear out. 60 days. Richard felt physically sick. Where will he go? Walter shrugged helplessly, spreading his hands. Your guess is as good as mine. Rent around here has gone through the roof. There's nowhere affordable for a man on his kind of wages. His daughter keeps calling, begging him to move in with her and her family in Seattle. He's got grandkids he barely sees. But he won't go. Still refuses, Walter confirmed, shaking his head sadly. Says this diner the people here, they're his family now. Says helping folks out now and then. Like that young mother. Grace gives him purpose. Being able to give something, even when he has so little himself, keeps him going, I suppose. Stubborn, proud man. The conversation lapsed into silence. Richard mumbled his thanks to Walter. His mind reeling. He slid out of the booth, leaving his barely touched pie behind. He needed air. But more than that, he needed to see. He needed to watch the architects of Arthur's potential ruin. He took up his observation post near the counter again. The diner was getting busier as the lunch crowd started trickling in. He watched Chloe and Ethan, their earlier smugness now replaced with a feigned professionalism that seemed brittle, rehearsed. He saw Ethan linger near the large coffee urn close to Arthur's dish station, pretending to wipe it down. When Arthur turned his back for a moment, Richard saw Ethan quickly stoop and fiddle with something near the base, the valve, before straightening up casually. A few minutes later, Chloe made a show of recounting her, till sighing loudly. Just being extra careful, she announced to no one in particular, can't afford any mistakes with inventory coming up tomorrow. Then, as if on cue, Grace entered with her children, looking even more stressed than the last time she ordered minimally just soup for herself and grilled cheese for the kids when she went to pay. The familiar scene unfolded, but worse, this time she was short again, her face crumpling. "I am so sorry," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Chloe's response was instant and loud, drawing glances from nearby tables. "Oh, for crying out loud. Again. Maybe you should figure out your budget before you order. We're not a charity." The humiliation on Grace's face was acute. Before Richard could even think of intervening, Arthur was there, emerging from the kitchen, his expression calm but firm. He didn't say a word to Chloe, just reached into his pocket. "No, Arthur. Please, I can't," Grace protested weakly. "It's all right, Amy," Arthur said, his voice kind, but carrying a quiet authority, using her name correctly this time, a subtle correction to Chloe's impersonal dismissal. He handed Chloe the money. "Kids need to eat." He gave Grace a reassuring nod before turning back to his station. As Henry disappeared back into the kitchen, Richard heard Ethan mutter to Chloe, low but distinct, "Perfect C." Playing the hero again. Adds another $15 to the hole in the till for tomorrow. Eleanor's gonna love this. Richard felt a cold, hard knot form in his stomach. He had the backstory. He knew the stakes. Not just a job, but potentially homelessness. He'd heard the plot. Now he was seeing them, actively, maliciously setting the stage. He slipped out of the diner, pulling out his burner phone as he walked quickly towards his car. He had one more call to make. He needed to arrange his own piece on the board for tomorrow's confrontation. He needed Sophia Evans. The reckoning was coming, and he would be ready. The trap was meticulously set, combining lies with manufactured faults. As the manager confronted the unsuspecting Arthur, the diner held its breath. The air in Harrison's diner crackled with a nervous energy the next morning. Today was inventory day, and Eleanor was already pacing between her small office and the kitchen checklists in hand, her expression tight with stress. Richard Harrison, nursing his first coffee of the day from his now familiar booth, felt a different kind of tension, a cold, coiled readiness. The hidden cameras he'd had installed overnight were operational silent witnesses waiting for the performance to begin. Arthur arrived punctually as always, moving with the same pained stiffness Richard now understood stemmed from relentless work and untreated arthritis. He gave a brief, polite nod to Eleanor before disappearing into the steam-filled alcove of the dish station. Minutes later, Chloe and Ethan came in together, whispering, sharing a conspiratorial glance that made Richard's blood run cold. The players were in position. Richard discreetly checked the burner phone in his pocket. A simple text message confirmed, "On my way, S.E. Sophia Evans." He'd spent a considerable time on the phone with her the previous evening, explaining the situation, without revealing his true identity, posing as someone investigating workplace issues, and appealing to her sense of justice. Sophia, a single mother, genuinely struggling to make ends meet, while raising her bright 5-year-old daughter Olivia, had readily agreed to help after Richard promised a substantial, anonymous contribution to Olivia's education fund. It wasn't just the money. She'd said, her voice firm over the phone. It was about standing up to bullies. Richard felt a pang of guilt using her real struggles as part of his plan. But the alternative, letting Chloe and Ethan succeed, was unthinkable. At precisely 10:15 a.m., the bell above the door chimed. Sophia Evans entered, holding Olivia's small hand tightly. They looked the part perfectly. Neat but simple clothes, a hint of weariness in Sophia's eyes that wasn't entirely feigned. Richard watched Chloe approach their chosen booth near the counter, her customer service smile plastered on. "Just a grilled cheese for my daughter and a cup of soup for me, please." Sophia ordered, her voice quiet but clear. 20 minutes later, Sophia walked to the register, Olivia trailing shyly behind her. She opened her wallet, fumbled inside, and then her face fell a mask of convincing distress washing over her features. Richard held his breath. "Oh no. I am so sorry," Sophia said to Chloe, her voice low, tinged with genuine-sounding panic. "I thought I had enough cash. My card got declined yesterday. Some bank issue they're still fixing. Oh gosh, I'm short. $15 short." Chloe's smile vanished, replaced by an icy stare. "Well, we can't just give away food, Mum," she said sharply, her voice loud enough to draw attention from the nearest tables. "Maybe you should count your money before ordering next time." Sophia's eyes instantly welled with tears. Real tears, Richard suspected, born from the memory of similar past humiliations. Olivia looked up at her mother, confused and worried. Could I maybe wash some dishes?" Sophia stammered, playing her part beautifully, looking utterly desperate. "To make up the difference, I really don't have anywhere else to go right now." "We have staff for that," Chloe replied curtly, already turning away dismissively. Right on cue, Arthur emerged from the dish station, wiping his hands on his apron. He'd clearly been watching his expression, troubled. He approached the register slowly, his gaze settling kindly on Sophia. "I've got it, Chloe," he said, quietly, already reaching into his worn pocket. "Oh no, Arthur, please, that's really not necessary," Sophia protested, looking down, shrinking slightly under Chloe's glare. Arthur offered her that gentle, weary smile Richard had come to recognize. "It's all right, dear. We all need a little help sometimes. You just pay it forward when things get better for you." "Okay." He handed the crumpled bills over to Chloe, covering Sophia's shortfall. Richard watched Ethan stationed at the second, currently unused register. A flicker of a triumphant smirk crossed Ethan's face as he subtly nodded at Chloe. The bait had been taken. The trap was sprung. Sophia thanked Arthur profusely, her relief seeming entirely genuine, as she gathered Olivia and quickly left the diner. Less than 10 minutes later, just as Eleanor emerged from her office with another stack of inventory sheets, a loud hissing sound suddenly erupted from the large industrial coffee machine located near the dish station. "Whoa!" Ethan exclaimed, feigning alarm. "What's that noise? Smells like steam." He rushed over, making a show of peering at the back of the machine. Eleanor hurried towards the commotion, her frown deepening. Ethan fiddled with a valve near the base, the same one Richard had seen him tamper with earlier. "Looks like this main valve is loose again," he announced loudly, ensuring Eleanor could hear leaking steam. "Lucky it didn't blow completely. Didn't you just clean around here this morning?" "Arthur." He glanced pointedly towards the dish station. "Got to be more careful around the equipment, old-timer." Arthur looked over confused. "I didn't touch the valve," he started to say, but his voice was drowned out as Chloe hurried over to Eleanor, her face a mask of urgent concern. Eleanor," Chloe interrupted, touching the manager's arm lightly. "While you're out here, I think we really need to check Register 1. Right now. I just did a quick spot count after that woman, Sophia, left, and I'm almost positive we're short. Again. Maybe $20 this time." Eleanor looked from the hissing coffee machine back to Chloe, her face pale and drawn. "Short again. Impossible. And what on earth is wrong with the coffee machine?" Now inventory day was stressful enough without these constant problems. "It's weird timing, isn't it?" Ethan chimed in smoothly, stepping away from the coffee machine. "Money goes missing right after Arthur was handling cash at the register, and the machine right next to his station suddenly starts malfunctioning. I hate to say it, but..." He let the accusation hang heavy and poisonous in the air. "Maybe we should check the security cameras," Chloe suggested, her voice dripping with false helpfulness. "Oh, wait. They're still broken, aren't they? Convenient?" The diner had fallen unnervingly quiet. Conversation ceased, cutlery clattered onto plates, and stayed there. Richard saw Walter, the regular customer, push his chair back slightly, his face flushed with anger, his lips tight. Walter muttered something under his breath that Richard couldn't quite hear, but the sentiment was clear. Other staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly finding the floor or the ceiling incredibly interesting. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eleanor looked around, clearly distressed, caught between the mounting evidence, the pressure of inventory day, and perhaps a lingering doubt about Arthur. But the combined weight of the repeated cash shortages and the sudden equipment failure seemed too much to ignore. She took a deep breath, her shoulders slumping slightly before squaring with reluctant resolve. This is too much," she said, her voice strained but firm. "If someone is stealing and being careless with equipment, I have to know right now." She turned her gaze fixed on the dish station alcove. Chloe and Ethan exchanged a nearly imperceptible look of triumph before arranging their faces into masks of grave concern. They fell into step behind Eleanor as she marched towards the unsuspecting Arthur, who was carefully loading a rack into the industrial washer, oblivious to the storm about to break over his head. "Arthur," Eleanor called out, her voice sharp, cutting through the tense silence. "Can I speak with you for a moment, please?" Arthur looked up, wiping condensation from his brow. Confusion clouded his tired features as he took in the serious expressions of the manager and the two cashiers approaching him. Richard's heart pounded against his ribs. The confrontation was beginning. The trap sprung, the accusations made. But as the owner stepped from the shadows, the real truth was about to explode into the light. Arthur stared at Eleanor, the manager's words echoing in the sudden suffocating silence of the diner. "Let you go. Company policy. Theft." The world seemed to tilt, the familiar clatter and aroma of the diner fading into a dull roar in his ears. You think I'm stealing," He finally managed his voice, barely a whisper laced with disbelief and a deep, profound hurt. "We've seen you at the register multiple times when you have no business being there," Arthur Ethan interjected quickly, his voice dripping with false sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. "And the money always goes missing right after." "And the coffee machine," Chloe added, shaking her head sadly. "We can't have accidents waiting to happen." "I was helping customers," Arthur protested, bewildered, looking from face to face, searching for understanding customers who couldn't pay their full bills. "I was putting money in, not taking it out." "And I didn't touch that valve." Chloe scoffed loudly. "Putting money in, on a dishwasher's salary. How convenient an excuse." Arthur's weathered hands began to tremble, not just from age or arthritis, but from the crushing weight of the implication. The injustice of it stole his breath. "I would never steal." He repeated his voice, regaining a fraction of its quiet strength. "Not from anyone, and certainly not from this diner. This place. It's been my lifeline these past few years." Eleanor looked genuinely torn, her gaze flickering between Arthur's pained face and the accusing stares of Chloe and Ethan. "Arthur, I've always trusted you," she stammered, clearly distressed. "But the numbers don't lie. The machine malfunctioned right by your station, and with multiple witnesses saying they've seen you accessing the register inappropriately." "Multiple witnesses." Arthur looked around the silent diner, his confusion palpable. "Both Chloe and Ethan reported seeing you," Eleanor explained, her voice barely audible. Understanding dawned slowly on Arthur's face, like a sunrise in reverse, extinguishing the light in his eyes. It was followed by a wave of profound sadness, a weariness that seemed to settle bone-deep, making Richard's chest tighten. The old man didn't rage, didn't accuse his co-workers of lying, didn't plead. He simply stood there, his dignity, a fragile shield against the humiliation being heaped upon him. He straightened his slightly stooped shoulders. "I see," he said quietly, his voice raspy, I suppose. "You'll be wanting my resignation, then." Eleanor flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "Arthur, I'm so sorry, but based on the evidence presented, I'm afraid I have to let you go immediately. Company policy for theft and negligence it's clear." A collective gasp rippled through the watching staff and customers. Disbelief was etched on many faces, Walter. The regular took an involuntary step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. Ethan stepped forward, a smug, satisfied glint in his eyes. "Don't worry, Eleanor. I'll escort him to get his things." "That won't be necessary." The voice, calm but carrying an undeniable authority, cut through the tense atmosphere like a knife. Every head turned. Richard Harrison pushed himself up from the booth. He was no longer the stooped, nondescript customer. He stood to his full height, pulling the grimy baseball cap from his head, revealing the sharp, familiar features known from countless business articles. He met Eleanor's widened eyes directly as he walked towards the group near the dish station, his stride confident, purposeful, the stride of a man used to being in charge. Eleanor's face went sheet white. Mr. Harrison, I had no idea you were—" Clearly Richard interrupted his voice, resonating through the now deathly silent diner. Every fork was frozen mid-air. Every conversation halted. Even the kitchen clatter seemed to cease. "There seems to be a situation here that requires the owner's immediate attention." He reached the group, his gaze sweeping over Eleanor's stunned face, Arthur's bewildered one, before landing with glacial coldness on Chloe and Ethan, who had both frozen, their triumphant expressions rapidly dissolving into confusion and dawning panic. "Mr. Harrison," Sir Eleanor stammered, "if I'd known you were coming for an inspection." "This isn't an inspection," Eleanor Richards stated calmly, though his eyes were hard. "I've been here every day this week, observing my business from a customer's perspective, and what I've witnessed has been illuminating." Ethan forced a nervous laugh. "Sir, we were just, following protocol for the theft incidents and the equipment damage, as I was explaining to Eleanor." "Enough," Richard said. His quiet tone held more command than a shout. Ethan's mouth snapped shut instantly. Richard turned, slightly addressing the entire room. "For those who don't recognize me," he announced, his voice clear and strong, "I'm Richard Harrison. I founded Harrison's Diners 15 years ago with a simple vision: treat our customers like family and treat our employees with the respect they deserve." His gaze lingered for a moment on Arthur before sweeping back across the room. Somewhere along the way, it seems that vision was compromised. He reached into the inner pocket of his flannel shirt, incongruous against the expensive watch suddenly visible on his wrist, and pulled out a small, sleek device. "You mentioned the security cameras being broken. Eleanor, interesting. Because I personally authorized the installation of a state-of-the-art covert audio-video surveillance system just yesterday." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "But I never received notification." "The budget." "I'm aware," Richard cut her off smoothly, though his eyes held a reprimand. "There are several communication breakdowns we will address later. Eleanor right now." He moved towards the large flat-screen TV mounted in the corner, typically used for displaying specials. "I'd like everyone to see exactly what's really been happening in my diner." With practiced ease, he connected the device. The screen flickered to life, displaying a crystal-clear high-definition image. Time-stamped from the previous day, the diner held a collective breath. The footage began. There was Ethan leaning over the register, pocketing a few small bills while telling a customer their total, his back partially turned. Richard saw Ethan's face, pale dramatically on screen, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple in the present. Next, Megan voiding legitimate transactions after customers had paid and left. Chloe let out a small choked gasp, taking an involuntary step backward. Then the damning audio accompanying the video of Chloe and Ethan huddled at the counter's end. Frame Henry for stealing. Pathetic old man. My cousin gets the job. Split the bonus. Loosen the valve. Blame him for the damage, too. The enhanced audio captured every cruel whisper with perfect clarity. Angry murmurs rippled through the customers. Walter's face was stony with fury. Richard saw another regular customer shake his head in disgust. Richard advanced the footage. Now the screen showed Arthur quietly slipping money into the register after helping Grace. It showed him staying hours after his shift, meticulously cleaning areas others ignored. It showed him patiently helping the teenage waitress, taking the blame for a minor spill she'd caused when Eleanor had approached. Richard saw tears well up in Arthur's eyes as he watched himself on screen. Not tears of sadness, but of quiet vindication. He saw several waitresses exchange glances, nodding slightly. Finally, Richard paused the footage on a frame from that very morning, a clear shot of Chloe deliberately miscounting change into the till before closing it, followed by Ethan fiddling conspicuously with the coffee machine valve just moments before the incident. This morning's evidence, Richard announced, his voice tight with controlled fury, turning to face Chloe and Ethan directly, was entirely manufactured. The only theft, the only deliberate damage, the only betrayal of trust occurring in this diner has been perpetrated by the two individuals making these accusations. Ethan, his face now ashen, stammered. "Harrison, there's There's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Richard repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerously soft, intense level. "Is that what you call deliberately framing a dedicated elderly employee for theft and negligence? Is that what you call stealing directly from the register day after day? Is that what you call mocking a man who has endured more hardship than either of you could possibly comprehend, yet still shows more compassion in a single shift than you've shown in your entire lives?" He then turned sharply towards Eleanor, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and profound self-reproach. "Did you know, Eleanor?" He challenged, his voice resonating with sudden intensity, "that this poor worker you were about to fire lives in that dilapidated trailer behind this building, that he lives there because he's pouring every spare cent into paying off the crushing medical debt left after his beloved wife Evelyn died. Did you know he sometimes skips meals himself so he can afford to help customers who come up short, because he remembers what it feels like to be hungry and proud? Did you know he works through excruciating arthritis pain every single day without a word of complaint because he refuses to be a burden on anyone?" Eleanor shook her head, tears streaming down her face, shame coloring her cheeks. "No, Mr. Harrison, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," Richard continued, his voice heavy with the weight of his own realization, looking around at his other employees now. "Because the management structure I created failed him. The communication breakdowns, the focus solely on the numbers, the lack of genuine connection. I failed him. I failed Arthur. We were so focused on the bottom line," his voice cracked slightly with emotion, "we forgot about the human line. Arthur Lawson embodies everything Harrison's Diners was meant to stand for: compassion, dignity, service. And instead of honoring that we allowed him, his gaze swung back hard and unforgiving to Chloe and Ethan to be humiliated and nearly destroyed by two individuals whose only concern was their own petty greed and malice." Chloe finally broke, collapsing into loud, gulping sobs. "Please, Mr. Harrison, you didn't mean to get caught." Richard finished coldly, cutting her off. "That's the only thing you regret." Ethan, seeing his last hope vanish, his face contorted with rage and desperation, made a sudden lunge for the main door. But Walter and another large, burly regular customer moved instantly, blocking his path. "I don't think so," Walter growled, his voice low and menacing. "You can't leave just yet," Richard stated calmly, pulling out his personal cell phone. "The police will want to speak with both of you about the theft and conspiracy captured quite clearly on video." As if on cue, Richard, having alerted them discreetly before the confrontation began, showing them the key footage, two uniformed police officers walked purposefully into the diner. The sight of the uniforms finally broke Ethan's bluster. His face crumpled in defeat. The officers approached Chloe and Ethan, their voices calm but firm, as they informed them they were being detained for investigation of theft and conspiracy. Richard watched impassively as they were handcuffed and escorted out past the stunned silence of their former co-workers and the contemptuous glares of the customers. Their departure felt like a purging and necessary excision of the poison that had infected his diner. The police car pulled away, its flashing lights briefly illuminating the shocked faces remaining inside. An awkward, heavy silence filled the room. Richard took a deep breath, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving behind a profound sense of responsibility and the weight of the task ahead. He turned towards the dish station, towards the elderly man who had stood through the entire ordeal with quiet, unwavering dignity. Arthur looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear meeting Richard's gaze directly. Richard walked towards him, the distance across the diner floor feeling like miles, the words of apology forming in his mind, heavy and inadequate. The climax was over, but the true reckoning, the path towards redemption, was just beginning. The storm had passed, leaving wreckage and relief. Now came the hardest part, rebuilding trust, making amends, and finding an earned peace. In the aftermath of the police departure, an almost reverent silence settled over Harrison's diner. The residual shock hung in the air, thick with unspoken emotions, relief, lingering anger, and a profound sense of vindication. Customers slowly returned to their meals, conversation starting up again in hushed tones. Staff members began almost mechanically at first to clear tables and resume their duties, but their eyes kept darting towards the back of the diner, towards the dish station, where Arthur stood, and towards the owner, Richard Harrison, who was now slowly walking towards him. Arthur watched Richard approach, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and quiet bewilderment. He wiped his damp hands on his apron, standing a little straighter, his inherent dignity returning despite the emotional turmoil he'd endured. Richard stopped a few feet away, his own face etched with sincerity and a humility that hadn't been there a week ago. The corporate mask was gone, leaving only the man confronting his own failures. Arthur Richard began his voice, quiet but clear, resonating in the relative stillness. I owe you an apology, a profound one. Not just for what almost happened today, not just for the cruelty you endured from Chloe and Ethan, but for the years I allowed a system to exist where your dedication went unrecognized, where your struggles were invisible, where you weren't treated with the basic respect and security you deserved. I failed you, Arthur. And I failed the values this place was supposed to represent. I am truly, deeply sorry. Arthur looked at him, his clear eyes holding no bitterness, only a deep weariness. Mr. Harrison, you didn't know. That's no excuse, Richard replied firmly but gently. It was my job to know. It was my responsibility. I hope you'll allow me to start making amends. He held out a simple manila folder. This isn't charity, Arthur. This is long overdue recognition. Hesitantly, Arthur took the folder and opened it. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he scanned the first page. Effective immediately, Richard explained. You're being promoted to floor manager for this location. It comes with a substantial salary increase, full health benefits starting today, paid time off, and significantly more reasonable hours. The physical demands will be much less taxing. You'll oversee the front-of-house staff, ensure quality service, basically help us maintain the kind of atmosphere this diner should have always had. Arthur stared at the paper, then back at Richard, disbelief warring with dawning hope. But, Mr. Harrison, I don't have any management experience. Richard smiled warmly. Arthur, you have something far more valuable. You have integrity. You have compassion. You understand people. You understand what this diner should be about, better than anyone. Probably better than me. The technical aspects, the paperwork. We can teach you that Eleanor will help train you, but the core values, you've been living them every day. Before Arthur could fully absorb this, Richard held out a second folder. There's something else. I took the liberty of speaking with your daughter last night. Arthur looked up sharply, alarmed. My daughter Emily. You called Sarah Emily. She doesn't know about the trailer, how things really are. She knows now, Arthur Richard said softly. I explained everything, about the trailer, the medical bills, all of it. She was heartbroken naturally, that you've been struggling alone all these years, trying to protect her. Tears welled instantly in Arthur's eyes, threatening to spill. I never, I never wanted to burden her." "She said you'd say that." Richard replied, a gentle smile touching his lips. "She also asked me to tell you something very important. Love isn't a burden, Arthur. It's a privilege. Her biggest regret was not knowing, not being able to help the father she loves so much." He tapped the second folder. "Inside, you'll find the deed to a small, comfortable house, just 3 blocks from here. It's not fancy, but it's clean, it's warm, it has a little garden. And most importantly, Arthur, it's yours. No rent, no mortgage. Consider it. 7 years of overdue bonuses and hazard pay." Arthur's hands trembled violently as he opened the second folder, his eyes blurring as he saw the official document with his name clearly printed on it, Mr. Harrison. I can't accept this," he stammered, overwhelmed. It's too much." "It's not enough," Richard countered firmly, his gaze unwavering. "But it's a start. And one more thing." He took a deep breath. "I also made arrangements with the hospital's financial assistance department this morning. Evelyn's remaining medical debt. It's been paid in full. It's done. Arthur, it's over." At this, Arthur's composure finally completely broke. Years of stoic endurance, quiet struggle and private grief gave way. Tears streamed freely down his lined face, silent sobs shaking his thin frame. He leaned against the dish station for support, overwhelmed by a gratitude so immense it was physically painful. After a long moment, he looked up at Richard, his voice thick with emotion. Why would you do all this?" "For me," Richard's own eyes misted over. He reached out, placing a hand gently on Arthur's shoulder. "Because you reminded me of something vital I'd forgotten, Arthur. That a business isn't just about profit margins and expansion plans. It's about people. It's about community. It's about how we treat each other. Every single day under the radar, you were living the values I only talked about. You showed me what Harrison's should be." He extended his hand. "So thank you, Arthur. Not just for your years of dedicated service, but for showing me how to be a better owner and a better human being." Arthur grasped Richard's hand, his grip surprisingly firm. When they finally turned and walked slowly out towards the main dining area, the entire diner, staff and customers alike, burst into spontaneous, heartfelt applause. Eleanor stood near the counter, her eyes red from crying, but her smile was genuine relieved. The staff gathered around, offering Arthur handshakes, pats on the back, and sincere words of congratulation. Richard held up a hand, waiting for the applause to subside. "There's one more thing everyone needs to know," he announced, his voice clear and carrying throughout the room. "What happened here this week? It was a failure at multiple levels, and it stops now." He took another breath, starting today. Harrison's Diners is implementing a new company-wide policy. All employees at every location will receive a true living wage. We are instituting comprehensive health benefits for all full-time staff, and we are establishing an employee emergency assistance fund. His voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. No one who works for this company should ever have to choose between paying their bills and maintaining their basic human dignity. No one should have to live in fear, like Arthur did. A fresh wave of cheers and applause broke out. Richard saw hope flicker in the eyes of his employees. Arthur stood beside him, still looking slightly dazed but straighter now, the immense weight visibly lifted from his shoulders. Just then, Grace, the young mother. Arthur had helped multiple times, stepped forward, timidly holding the small envelope from the collection they'd started earlier. We still wanted to give this to you, Arthur," she said softly. It's not much, but—" Richard smiled kindly. "Thank you, Grace. That's incredibly thoughtful. But as I said, Arthur's immediate expenses are fully covered." He paused, looking around at the supportive faces. "But I have a better idea for those funds, if you all agree. Let's use this money and a matching contribution from the company to start the Arthur Lawson Community Fund. Right here at this diner. A fund to help other employees or even customers facing unexpected medical bills or sudden hardship. What do you say?" The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Arthur looked around, truly seeing the faces of the people he'd served quietly for years. Customers whose names he knew, whose children he'd watched grow, whose struggles he'd eased in small, unseen ways. Their smiles now reflected not just gratitude, but genuine respect and affection. In the weeks and months that followed, Arthur settled into both his new home and his new role as floor manager. Though financially secure, he chose to stay on at the diner, not out of necessity, but out of choice. It was more than a workplace. It was his community, his purpose, renewed, his found family. He moved with less pains now, his smile quicker, his advice sought after, by younger staff who saw him not as the poor worker, but as the heart of the diner. Richard Harrison kept his promise, remaining a visible hands-on presence, not just at the flagship location, but across his entire company. The changes he implemented, fair wages, better benefits, open communication, a culture valuing compassion as highly as profit, slowly began to transform Harrison's diners from the inside out. As for Chloe and Ethan, their names quickly faded, becoming cautionary tales whispered in the industry, a stark reminder that character matters far more than cleverness, and that true worth isn't measured by what you take, but by what you give, especially when you think no one is watching. How often do we truly see the people around us, beyond the uniform they wear or the job they perform? Arthur's story is a powerful reminder that immense strength, dignity, and kindness can reside in the quietest corners, often hidden beneath hardship. And perhaps Richard's journey shows us that it's never too late to bridge the distance to reconnect with the values that truly matter, even after years of drifting away. The ripples of one person's integrity, like Arthur's, can indeed change everything. This story certainly left us with much to reflect on, and we imagine it might have stirred something in you too. What part of Arthur's resilience or Richard's transformation resonated most deeply with you? We'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Let's share our perspectives. If this journey touched your heart, please show your support with a like. And if you feel this story carries a message worth sharing, perhaps about kindness, seeing true worth, or the courage to change, consider sharing it with others who might appreciate it. For more stories that delve into the complexities of life and the strength of the human spirit, please subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next emotional journey we embark on together. Thank you so much for joining us for this story. Until next time, take care and keep looking for the extraordinary in the ordinary.